Hello and welcome to I Couldn't Throw It Out, the podcast where I tell the stories behind the treasures I've saved and then we try to throw them out. In this episode, a tape recording I saved for 45 years helped me track down many surprises in our family history, including this crazy story about my great-grandfather in Lithuania.
Secretly at night, they kidnapped him and they took him to Ligum, and there he stayed for 14 years.
It's a tale of how one immigrant family became totally American and spread across the continent. And it's coming up right now.
I couldn't throw it out. I had to scream and shout. Before I turn to dust, I've got to throw it out.
Hello, Sally Libby.
Hello, Michael Small.
I have a question for you. Do you ever feel that we haven't had enough of my relatives on this podcast?
I was just thinking that.
Yeah, well, I read your mind. Today we've got some help with that.
Awesome.
We have 4 people joining us today, and they are all my first cousins once removed. It would roll off the tongue much easier if they were my second cousins, but I looked it up and that's not what they are. We just have to live with this. So, cousins once removed. I want you to meet Sally Libby, the co-host of this podcast, I Couldn't Throw It Out.
Hello, Gay.
Hi, Sally.
Sally.
Hey, Sally.
Hi there.
Woohoo.
So we are gathered here today, once removers, because all of us, except Sally, are members of the Levitt family. Doesn't matter that we have different last names, we're all Levitt. Here's the connection. My mother, Doris, was the sister of your grandfathers, Harold and Melvin. So it's one sister, 2 older brothers. Just to be clear which of us comes from each of those Levitts, I'd like to ask each of you to tell me just a little bit about yourself and the name of the Levitt grandfather that you're related to. Let's start with Sonny.
So I'm Sonny Levitt. I live in the Washington, D.C. area. I've been here for over 30 years. And I am 56 years old, very proud to say that. I have been for the last 14 years an executive leadership coach and career coach. And I am the granddaughter of Melvin Levitt and Sylvia Altman.
I think that that's a natural segue into Matt.
It is because we share Melvin and Sylvia as our grandparents. So Sonny is actually my first cousin. To fill you guys in on the rest, my name is Matt Lawson. I am turning 50 this year. No follow-up questions, please. I started out my career as a sportscaster. I have now become a corporate sellout, and I do media relations. So now I'm just on the other side of what I used to do. And I've been living in Texas for the majority of my life, over 40 years.
Speaking of sports, Barry, would you be next?
Sure. My name is Barry Baum. I'm approximately 52. I live in Milwaukee. I've lived here for the last 4 years. Previously, I lived in Brooklyn. And my grandfather was Harold Levitt.
And the last but not least, Josh, tell us about you.
I am Josh. I am 26 years old. I live in San Francisco in the Haight-Ashbury district. I was born and raised here, and I am an architect for the city of San Francisco.
And then there's your other claim to fame. You're the grandson of Harold Levitt.
Yes.
Now, if you're wondering why I gathered you here, it's mostly because of one object, something I've saved for 45 years in a box that I've lugged with me wherever I went. It's a recording of your distant relative, Sadie Levitt Weissman. Sadie was your grandparents' first cousin, and she was really interested in family history. She tracked down details about our ancestors that almost everyone had forgotten. In 1977, my father recorded Sadie telling the story of our family. And I have a cassette of it right here. Voila.
I'm sorry, Michael, what is a cassette? Could you tell us?
Oh. It's something you used to record on in the ancient days, and it holds many wonderful details about where all of you came from. Sadie got her information mostly by interviewing family members. Barry, let me ask you something. When Levitts tell a story, is it always 100% accurate?
No, it is not.
Have you ever heard a Levitt exaggerate?
Yes, I have.
Okay, just checking. Thank you. That was a little reality check. So this tape may not be the most reliable bit of history, but here's why it's amazing. Until this tape was made, nobody knew a thing about our ancestors. Nothing. But in this tape, there are clues, and those clues led me to the internet. And what I discovered is astounding, at least to me. We now know exact details about our ancestors, all the way back to the time of the American Civil War. Things that many families don't know. When I tracked down all this stuff based on Sadie's clues, I got so excited that I had to print it out. So now I don't just have a cassette, I also have a big stack of papers. But the reality is, when I check out from this planet sometime in the future, someone's going to get hired to throw this stuff right in the dumpster. I have some very close family members who'd say, so what? It's the past. Throw it out. Why do we need this stuff? But I know there are thousands of people out there who understand what I'm talking about. People who've held onto boxes of old photos and family histories. We can't let this stuff get thrown away. So that's why I gathered the four of you. My only hope is to tell you the unknown tale of your past and make it so exciting, or at least exciting enough, that one of you will want to keep this stuff and promise me that you'll pass it on to another generation. The tale that I pieced together involves family members who died long before we were born. But when you learn more about them, you can see that their actions, their decisions, their mistakes sent out ripples that determined who each of us is today. Their story includes some big surprises. A kidnapping, a death from appendicitis, a deadly flood, a 10-year-old girl who gets left behind when her parents move across the ocean. Talk about Home Alone. Then a violin virtuoso, valuable jewelry, cheap, crappy jewelry. There were 2 horrible car accidents.
Wow.
And a lot about Wilmington, Delaware. Barry, where's your friend Joe Biden? He loves Wilmington.
Did you invite him, Michael?
I thought you'd invite him.
I apologize. Maybe the next one, the sequel.
Michael, I'm sorry to interrupt, but my father played baseball with Joe Biden in junior high school.
What? That is the interruption that we want. Thank you. Now let me pause to ask a really basic question. Sonny, do you feel slightly American, totally American?
Yeah, I feel pretty much 100% American.
No, the thing is, we are totally American. But for us, and for many families like ours, our roots are not deep at all. I'm just the second generation born in this country, and you're the third. Not a long time. Josh, do you know what country your mother, Donna's grandparents lived in before coming to the U.S.?
I know it was Eastern Europe, and something is telling me Lithuania, but I don't know where I'm getting that from. I could be totally making that up.
That is the crazy thing. That's normal. So many immigrant families cross that ocean and leave their history behind them. And I'm just curious, why is this the case? Does anyone have an answer that they want to give? Why don't immigrants like our great-grandparents and grandparents save the details from their life on the other side of the ocean? Do we have anyone with thoughts about that?
You might be asking the wrong question, Mike. To me, I'm not sure that it's that they don't save them. It's that they don't talk about them. Mm-hmm. And why do they not talk about them? I mean, this is a complete shot in the dark, but generations ago, I think there was probably such a huge emphasis placed on becoming American and fitting in here that people kind of abandoned at least publicly talking about where they came from because they so wanted to be included and involved here. But I could be wrong.
I agree with that. I think there was a huge emphasis on, immigrants who came to this country to assimilate as Americans. And so there was this either desire or need or thought to subjugate a little bit of your European or history or wherever you came from, and as Matt said, in order to fit into this country and to become American.
That really makes sense. And in a way, it's still true. If I want to tell the real story of our family, their whole lives were about different customs, a different religion. They even spoke a different language. Probably not the best thing to share if we want to fit in. Of course, there is one among us who always fits in. Sally, can you tell us about your family history? Where were your great-grandparents born?
How about we go great, great, great? My relatives missed the Mayflower by a few minutes. They came over in the late 1600s.
Oh boy. That's why we invited one wasp to join us.
Well, no, 1.5, because my father's side is exactly the same. They were late 1600s. My great grandparents were born here as well, but on the other side.
Yes, and same with me on my mother's side, who did a genealogy and went back 6 generations to England.
Whoa! Well, there you go. But the Levitts did not emulate you. They came over and they forgot everything. Or they didn't, as you said, they didn't talk about it. Okay, before we get started, I have another question. Do any of you belong to a synagogue, or do you follow any Jewish practices at all? Josh, do you follow any?
Yes, I had a bar mitzvah at 13. I wouldn't say I really practice anymore or go to temple anymore, but growing up, I definitely did. And it was a good community to be a part of. I still have a lot of friends from Hebrew school. So yeah, I really enjoyed it growing up.
Wow.
But yeah, not really practicing anymore.
And Barry, what about you?
Belonged to a synagogue until a couple of years ago. My kids were bar mitzvahed. We go to synagogue, or even now it's on Zoom on the high holidays, and we celebrate Hanukkah and Passover.
And of course, those bar mitzvahs, all of them, including yours, were the largest events that ever happened in this country. Matt, what about you?
I was raised in a house where my mother did her best. We lit Hanukkah candles and sang songs next to our Christmas tree. But in the end, the Christian side won out for me and my family.
Yeah. And Sunny?
Yeah, so I can remember up till about age 3, it's pretty much the same, lighting a menorah and the Christmas tree around the same time. My parents divorced when I was 3.5. And so, as Matt said, the Christian side won out. I did go to a few Seders with my father and visiting him in New York, but that's the extent to my experience, either with a synagogue or the Jewish traditions.
Michael, I have one of my favorite artifacts from this family is I have Melvin and Sylvia's menorah prominently displayed in my house. Mm-hmm. And I wish I knew more history about it. I don't know how far back it goes, but it's clearly extremely old.
The interesting thing is that we all now are very different in this range, but I want to ask you to stop for a minute and look at your hands. And if you are looking at them, we now have a lot of Levitts looking at their hands. And what I can tell you is that the story I'm telling today is in these hands. It's you. It is us. Despite our differences, it is us. You are looking at the hands of the great-great-grandchildren of a Lithuanian rabbi known as Moses Mendel Levit Sisinski.
Oh, wow.
Sadie had mentioned that Moses Mendel was born in 1846 in a Lithuanian town called Yanushok. So I looked up Yanushok on YouTube, and I found that just about 1 year ago, a travel agency called Jirulita Travel posted a video tour of the Jewish section of that town, which is now called Yanushkis. This video shows things about our family that I never expected to know. It turns out that the Jewish population in the 1800s included a few thousand people. Many of them left at the end of the 1800s, any of them who remained in the 1940s, which possibly includes distant relatives of ours, they were all murdered during the Holocaust.
Ugh.
And today there are no Jews in Janoschis. But that's not the end of the story. You can still see in the center of town 2 large synagogues, one white and one red, right beside each other and very close to the church. That already tells us a lot. First of all, Jews could never be happy with one synagogue. They always had to have another, a second one, so they could say, I would never go to that synagogue if my life depended on it. Also, those buildings tell us that Jews and Christians, at least at one point, got along well enough to worship right next to each other. Now here's the modern day surprise. The current residents of Janoschis and some of the Jews who moved away have worked together to restore both synagogues, turning them into museums and event spaces. The interior of one of them had been destroyed by the Nazis and the Soviets, who used it as a gym, but the other one has been beautifully preserved, so you can see the exact place where your great-great-great-grandparents prayed in the early 1800s. And if you want to take a look, I put a link to the clip on our website, throwoutpodcast.com. These 2 buildings were particularly important to Moses Mendel because, as Sadie learned from her research, he was kind of a brain. And for brainy Jewish boys in those days, the best possible option was to study to become a rabbi. Here's how Sadie tells it.
He was considered a prodigy at a very early age. He had a remarkable attitude for learning, but dire circumstances, financial, precluded intense learning until he was accepted at a gratuitous yeshiva there, seminary. And he spent 6 years there, and he met many Talmudic scholars, and at 18, he returned to his home in Janoschis and married Leah, the daughter of a small innkeeper. And he stayed there, and he developed his potential, and he became a very renowned spiritual leader.
Sadie goes on to explain that Moses became a rabbi who was in pretty high demand. In the version she tells, he was an amazing speaker. So he went around Russia giving lectures about life in poor Jewish communities. Is there anyone on this call who can carry a tune, who can sing well? Josh, how's your singing?
It's not great.
Okay, well, here's the thing. Moses Mendel was great at singing Hebrew prayers like a cantor, but we all know you don't need a good voice for that, so that explains the rest of us.
That's very true.
Moses had one other skill. Male Levitz, please close your ears for a minute. I hope you're not listening. He was also a moil. In other words, he did that little operation where baby boys are born.
Oh, God.
If any of you inherited that skill, I don't want to hear about it. Okay, you can listen again. The main point is the guy was versatile, a one-stop purveyor of everything rabbinical. He must have had a ton of energy, which may explain a little bit about his offspring, but we'll get to that in a bit. After their marriage, Miriam, Leah, and Moses moved away from Janoschis, and this led to a very interesting situation. I'm going to play you another clip from Sadie so you can hear about it.
From there, he became the spiritual leader of Pumpian. His reputation had grown, and he received a call to come to Ligel, a small community in Russia, from Pumpian. But the Pumpianers didn't want to let him go. So, secretly at night, they kidnapped him, and they took him to Ligel, and there he stayed for 14 years.
Your great-great-grandfather was kidnapped because of his Jewish learning. And that is all part of how you got where you are. If that hadn't happened, who knows? Now here's another crazy surprise. You know those 2 towns she mentioned, Ligum and Pumpian? On YouTube, right now, there are video tours of both of those towns too. They were and still are tiny towns. I don't know how it ended up that there are video tours of both of them. In the video of Pumpian, which is now called Pumpanai, you can see that the synagogue is gone. But they show the rabbi's house, and Moses was the rabbi. So that's probably the exact house your family lived in. You've heard the expression shabby chic?
Mhm.
Well, only one of those terms applies to this house, and it ain't chic.
Oh.
Let's just hope it was nicer 150 years ago. In their other town, Ligum, the synagogue is still there. It's a brick structure in pretty bad shape. Now it's used for storing grain. It's very rural there. Must have been a lot of Jewish farmers. So you may wonder, if Moses Mendel was such a prodigy, wouldn't he have gone to a larger town or a richer town? This seems to bring us back to the theme of Levitz and exaggeration. Maybe Moses Mendel wasn't quite the religious celebrity that Sadie described. Barry, I'm coming back to you again. Can you just confirm, have you ever heard exaggeration when a Levitt told a story?
Yes, I have.
There we go. What we know for sure is that Miriam and Moses stayed in Lithuania for 14 years after their marriage and had 7 children. The oldest son, Harry, would be your great-great-uncle or something. It sounds like he was kind of ambitious. In the late 1880s, he took off and went to the U.S., and he must have been in his 20s. Unfortunately, he made a big mistake. He moved to Pennsylvania, to a particular place called Johnstown.
Wow.
Yes, the Johnstown flood happened a year after he went there, and he was never heard from again. Your relative.
Oh.
Your relative.
Wow.
But he wasn't the only person with a plan to get out of Lithuania. The people of Ligum, that town, started moving to the U.S. in large numbers. 2 of the places they settled were Baltimore, Maryland, and another place you might not guess, Chattanooga, Tennessee. Now, according to Sadie, those Jews in Tennessee, they wanted a really good rabbi who was a good speaker. So they sent for Moses Mendel. He went, and he took the whole family with him. They got there in 1892. They made a real trip out of this. On the way to Tennessee, he stopped in Baltimore to give a speech to the other families from Ligum. And then he went to Virginia. Have any of you ever been in Norfolk, Virginia? Anybody?
Well, my mother's side of the family are from Norfolk, Virginia.
If you don't know it, you have relatives on your father's side, too, in Norfolk. And there's that, whatever that synagogue is, it's in Berkeley across the river. Your great-great-grandfather consecrated that synagogue.
Wow.
I think you just go there and look for like short, bald men, and you're probably related to them. When they got to Tennessee, Moses Mendel was the rabbi for the B'nai Chaim congregation, and they later changed the name to B'nai Zion, and it's there to this day. This is when the Sasinskis decided that one last name was enough, so they tossed the second one, and that's how we became Levitz. Partly, it's practical. The name is easier for Americans to pronounce, but it's also kind of a prestige move. Supposedly, this name means that we are direct descendants of Levi, who led one of the 12 tribes of Israel.
Woohoo!
The Levites used to have special religious status. They helped out with rituals in the synagogue. Often they were artists. But I have some bad news. This status is passed through the father's family. So, Sonny, you and your brother Mark are the only 2 with a male Levit father. That means you're the only legit Levites.
Wow.
And the buck stops here because neither of you had male kids. In other words, our branch of the family, downwardly mobile. One interesting detail is that the Oakes family, the ones who owned the New York Times, they're now Episcopalian New Yorkers. But they started out as Jews in Tennessee. It's true. And Sadie was very proud to say that your great-great-grandfather used his skills as a mohel. And you remember what a mohel is. He used it at the birth of Adolph Oakes. But I looked it up, and that's not true, because Oakes was born in 1858, and he had no sons. And to me, it is so interesting that this got into Sadie's story. Quite possibly, she just wanted our family, the Levitts, to have a piece of the New York Times. Wait, there's more. I was checking some details yesterday on Wikipedia, and I confirmed that Sadie was wrong, but she was close. It was not Adolph Oakes who went under the knife with Moses Mendel at his bris. It was his nephew, Julius Oakes Adler, born in Chattanooga on December 3rd, 1892. Not only did Julius become a major hero in both World War I and World War II, but he also became the publisher of the Chattanooga Times and general manager of the New York Times. Barry, you worked at the New York Post. I worked at People magazine. We could have gone right to the New York Times and claimed a family connection. Do you regret it?
I had an interview at the Times once. I should have brought that up. I didn't know about it.
That's a missed opportunity. So now we're going to get to the second family tragedy after the Johnstown flood. They'd been in Chattanooga a very short time, maybe a year or so, and Moses Mendel got an acute case of appendicitis. I don't know if it was his religious beliefs or superstition, but he wouldn't let the doctors operate on him, and he died. And they ran out of room in the cemetery for the synagogue when he died, so B'nai Chaim bought a pretty bit of land in the hillside outside of town, and your great-great-grandfather was one of the first people buried there. It turns out Cindy and I have a goddaughter in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and two of our close friends live there. And we went to visit them. And so we went out to the cemetery, and we knew that his grave was at the top of the hill. He had the best view of anybody. And we went to the top of the hill, and all the headstones had crumbled, and you couldn't read the Hebrew. So we couldn't tell which was his. But we knew he was at the top, so we read the Kaddish. And Sally, that's the prayer for the dead.
I know that.
It was surprisingly moving. As Sally will tell you, I cry at everything, but it really felt powerful to be there at his grave. I'm sure in 1894, the rest of the family was crying too, not only from losing him, but they were stranded in Chattanooga. Moses Mendel's brother Abbe took over as rabbi of the synagogue for a while. But then, here's another interesting thing. Abbe moved to Halifax, Nova Scotia, where he became the shohen, or ritual slaughterer, for the Jewish community there. Did you know that you have relatives in Halifax, Nova Scotia?
No, we did not.
Sadie really loved the story. She got a kick out of it. He was sued by the SPCA. They thought he was doing cruelty to animals. So he had to go to court and explain kosher butchery, which, by the way, was the most humane way to do it at the time. And they ultimately let him off. Well, that was your great-great-grandfather's brother. But the rest of the family had to decide what to do. And you remember I told you, where did the people from Ligum go?
Baltimore? Was it Baltimore, Maryland?
That's a win. That is a win for Sonny. Okay, good job. Miriam Leah packed up all her kids, took them back, and she started a small grocery store on what was then called German Street, and I think now it's called Redwood Street. It's absolutely amazing when you think about people like Miriam Leah, how tough they were and how they survived. She was born and married and had children in Lithuania, got 7 kids across the ocean, took them to Tennessee and back again, bounced back from losing her husband, started her own business, and somehow became so American that she changed her name to Mary Lou. And she got a very interesting proposal for a second marriage, which Sadie shared.
A suitor came to call on her. And so she said, I'm not pretty, you can see. I'm not smart, you can hear. And I haven't any money, I'm telling you.
I just love that story because she was so honest. They got married. They ended up in Michigan. And the family spread out in other directions too. At least one of our relatives went to Utah and started a whole Mormon branch of the family. Don't know if Moses Mendel would be too thrilled that his grandchildren left the faith, but wherever he is, he has to get over it. Anyway, the good news is, this is where we get to the hero of our story. From our standpoint, he's the most important child of Moses Mendel and Mary Lou, their middle son, and your great-grandfather, Aaron Levitt. Without Aaron, none of us would be here. But there's another important point. He's the one who took the leap and helped the Levitts become 100% American. He was 8 when he moved with his family to Tennessee. Many years later, in the 1920s, Aaron published a newspaper advertisement for his business. This included cartoons that showed the stages of his career. First, he was a newspaper boy, and later, a traveling salesman selling silverware sets on a payment plan. The year 1909 was a very important one for Aaron. That's when he did one of the best things he could have done for us. He got married to Clara Leibowitz. I'm wondering, cousins, did any of you meet Clara Levitt?
Several times, yes.
Yes. 2 of you did.
Yes.
Yeah, same here. I have as well. I have photos of her when I was little.
Josh, no.
No.
Okay, can anybody give me a quick impression of her? Sonny, anything?
I remember her being very bright. She always looked up at you when she spoke with you with a big heart and a very big face for her stature, which is what made her so loving, and a big smile.
It's interesting, Sonny, you were very generous as a child because most people did not see her as warm and fuzzy. Oh. She left a very strong impression, and I can't really explain why, but I loved her. She had a huge impact on me, changed my whole life. I'm not even sure why. She definitely taught me that it's okay to have your own style. Her look was like proto-punk. She was about 4'8". She had her blue hair. She dyed it blue and combed it straight up. She had silver butterfly glasses shaped like butterflies.
Oh, yes. The glasses. I remember the glasses.
She had thick arthritic fingers with bright red fingernails. She had a cane that she'd use to ram the legs of anybody who got in her way if she was getting off a plane. She had a thick German accent. She had big hearing aids that squeaked. They only made her more deaf. When she put them in, she heard worse. And she had false teeth that would fall out in very inconvenient ways. I remember one night, it was dark. We're driving home from a restaurant on Route 128 north of Boston. Clara yells from the back seat, "Pull over!" Unfortunately, the meal did not agree with her. Maybe there was something unkosher in it. So she got out of the car. We pulled over. She got sick. She got back in the car. As we get closer to home, my mother asked Clara a question, and when she answers, we realize Clara's teeth are not with her any longer. So we turn around the car. We drive back. We find the same spot. My father, with a flashlight, goes digging for the teeth. He finds them, and we go home.
Oh, my word.
She was so entertaining. She taught us all to play canasta, and she would compete with us like crazy. She wanted to win. She would say, "I'm going to mop the floor up with you." And also, when it was time to take a card, she'd always say, "You can't get poor from taking." You can't get poor from taking, over and over again. She had more expressions than anybody you've ever met. What do you say when you're in the checkout line at Whole Foods and the cashier tells you that that tiny little heirloom tomato is going to cost you $10?
What a ripoff.
Okay, Clara's got a better one for you. The next time it happens, say this: Jesse James had a horse.
What?
Do you know what that means?
No. What does it mean?
It means, if you're going to rob me, go get a fucking horse.
Okay.
That's one of her best ones. She used to say it when we went to the deli and they tried to charge her for smoked salmon.
Oh.
Nobody ever knew what it meant, but she got her point across.
I bet she did. She was Clara.
Here's the part that seems really strange to me. My parents had absolutely no interest in Clara's history. My mother never asked who her grandparents were. It was like Clara dropped from the sky when Doris was born, and that was it. They didn't care. So we all picked up on that. We didn't ask her anything. We didn't ask her about her history. Like, why did she have a German accent? She was like a walking history museum, and we never went into a single gallery. We just stared at that stone facade. That's it. We never asked, what's inside? Pretty much that's all we ever knew until, I don't want this to sound like an ad, but I discovered ancestry.com and newspaper.com, and I got some interesting documentation. That explains Clara a little bit. We never knew her age, and I can confirm that there are official government documents where she has 5 different birth dates. She kept getting younger instead of older. The dates get later and later and later. That was Clara. I found out from census she had 7 brothers and sisters. And here's the interesting thing to explain her a little bit, the person who was maybe a little difficult. Her father, Beryl, came to Baltimore in 1890. He sailed from the port of Libau in Latvia, which may be why their last name was Leibowitz. In the U.S. Census records, he is listed as, quote, a rag dealer. I have to say I'm not really sure what that means. So can we agree that maybe he was a used clothing dealer? Does that sound right?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Definitely sounds like an old school kind of job. And something tells me he was an old school kind of guy. He was 15 years older than Clara's mother, Sarah. So either he was a cradle robber or they had an old school arranged marriage. He came to Baltimore first on his own. Then Sarah came over with some of the kids 6 years later in 1896. Here is the weird part. I found the document of Clara's trip to the U.S., your great-grandmother. And she came from Bremen, Germany, and she left through the port of Libau. And her trip was in 1900, 10 years after her father left, and 4 years after her mother left. She was in Eastern Europe without her parents from the age 10 to 14. The census says she joined the family in Baltimore when she was 15, and she already had a career. She was a milliner. Anyone know what a milliner is?
Makes hats.
Yeah, hat maker. But come on, she was 15 years old. How many of you had to be listed as a job when you were 15? Your great-grandmother was not from a wealthy family. And they lived right in the downtown area. If you ever see 914 East Fayette Street, it used to be a slum, but now it's all been torn down, replaced by a post office. Now it's interesting that Clary's sister Jenny grew up also in poverty, and she had a daughter named Bee. One of the things about Bee relates to another family. Has anyone here been to Baltimore?
Many times.
Do you know the name of the Symphony Hall?
Meyerhoff.
Yes. Do you know the name of the wing of one of the museums?
I don't.
Meyerhoff. There's Meyerhoff everywhere. The Meyerhoffs did very well. They were not like the Leibowitzes. And Jenny's daughter, Bee, married Jack Meyerhoff. So Jenny, Clara's sister, went from the worst kind of poverty to having a daughter marry into one of the wealthiest families in Baltimore. And they were my mother's first cousins.
Wow.
Of course, the most important person in Clara's life was not a sister or a niece. The most important person, even many years after he was gone, was her husband, Aaron Levitt. Because of Sadie's research, we know more about him than we know about Clara, even though we knew Clara and we didn't know him. There's a lot more information about him. Aaron's first big job was at Castleberg's jewelry store in downtown Baltimore. While he worked his way up to become the store manager, he must have had a good salary. He and Clara eventually settled in a nice home up near Druid Hill Park. I'm certain that Aaron and Clara shared wonderful times there, or, at the bare minimum, 2 wonderful nights, because those nights produced both of your grandparents, Melvin, who was born in 1910, and Harold, who was born in 1916. Without those nights, Sally and I would be on this call all alone, recording a podcast about her dog. Sally, tell us about your dog.
My dog? Misha?
Yeah.
Oh, she's a beautiful, fluffy King Shepherd.
Okay, that's enough of that. Enough. Okay. Back to the Levitts. About 6 weeks after Harold was born, Aaron got asked to start a branch of Castleberg's jewelry store in Wilmington, Delaware. Did you know all this already, Barry? Had you heard all this before?
No.
Oh, okay, good, because there's some good twists coming. We haven't had all the twists yet. He was running the store in 1921 when this crazy thing happened. It affected all of us, this crazy thing. You wouldn't think so, but it did. Joseph Castleberg, he was the owner of all these jewelry stores. He had branches in Washington, Norfolk, Virginia, Atlantic City. He called for an elevator in the Emersonian apartment house in Baltimore, which is still there to this day, near Druid Hill Park. And this was one of the fanciest places where rich Jewish people lived. It was built up in 1912 by Isaac Emerson. Anyone know what he invented?
Mm-mm.
No? Bromo seltzer. Does anyone know what bromo seltzer is?
No.
I do not.
Is it like Alka-Seltzer?
Yes. Sunny's hot today. She's got all the answers.
Got me on a good day.
This apartment had high carved ceilings, marble sinks. It was very fancy. I saw all this in an article about the apartment, which was renovated recently. So we learned all these details. When the elevator arrived, Joseph stepped in and something went wrong. He was caught in the door and he died in a terrible
My
way.
God. Awful.
Yeah, so he was really close to Aaron because the Baltimore newspapers wrote, Aaron Levitt told us what happened. So Aaron was the voice for the Castleberg family. And it had a big effect on our family because Aaron was about 37. He had just been naturalized as a citizen. He wasn't naturalized until he was 37. And he had to close the store. But he immediately opened his own store, which was called the Levitt Jewelry Company. This, Sally, is where we begin to see what a clever guy he was.
Okay.
He couldn't afford to stay in the Castleberg store, so he moved down the block to a second floor space at 724 Market Street, and he took out a big newspaper ad. Now, Sally, when you got out of college, you were very interested in marketing, so I sent you the ad copy. And if you can take a look at that, can you tell us what his slogan was?
Leave it to Levitt.
He always had a new way to promote the store. The big example was his credit policy. He gave credit to everyone. This was the perfect angle for the 1920s, when everyone was spending money like crazy, even if they didn't have it. Sally, can you read the credit policy for us?
Why worry about cash? You can buy anything in my stock on the easiest credit terms imaginable. Just bring along an honest face, and I'll show you how much faith I have in you. You wear as you pay. The Levitt way.
There we go. That's a slogan for all of us. You wear as you pay. The Levitt way. The guy was into marketing. And last of all, Sally, this is the cool thing. He had gone from a nice store owned by Castleberg. He's on the second floor in a little tiny space. How does he turn this into a good thing?
Our upstairs location brings prices down. Lower rent makes lower price tags. You'll realize that the minute you see the way my goods are marked. I'm perfectly willing to trade big profits for big boosters any day. I want to get you folks rooting for me. My shop isn't so big, but my values are.
There we go. The Levitt way. Sounds like some Levitts we know. That's the family tone. His business started growing. He moved down the block. And instead of just selling jewelry, I don't know if you guys know this, he sold electrical appliances, clothing, eyeglasses, and fabrics. And my mom used to tell the story that one of the customers asked him, what kind of fabric is this? And he didn't have a clue. So he could only think of the word shmata, which, Sally, means rag in Yiddish. Right. So he said to the customer, oh, it's genuine shmate cloth. And they bought it, apparently. He was doing better and better. He always had a gimmick. So clearly, to get publicity, he decided to remodel and have a big reopening on September 10th, 1927. There was a big article about it in the Wilmington Morning News. The story, interestingly, appears right next to a huge photo of Charlie Chaplin's ex-wife, Lita Gray, who was going on some kind of dramatic tour. And then Aaron Levitt next to her. It might have been a slow day for news. Now, I have to do a little digression, which I hope you'll humor me for, which is that many years later, I was working for People magazine and I was covering a Friars Club roast. I can't remember who it was for, but I figured they put me at the loser's table in the back. I'm wearing a tuxedo I bought in college for $10. The guy next to me, he does not look like his tuxedo cost $10. He looks very well dressed, very adult, unlike me. And so we start talking, and I say, well, what do you do? And he says, I'm in the jewelry business. And I go, oh my God, my grandfather was in the jewelry business. Was your father in the jewelry business? I wonder if they know each other. And I said, have you heard of Levitt's Jewelry Store in Wilmington, Delaware? And he said, no, I haven't. My store's in New York. And I said, oh, is it on 47th where you buy all the jewels? Because my grandfather used to come up to 47th Street and buy jewels there. He goes, well, actually, we're farther up Fifth Avenue. And I'm like, woo, good for you. The high price spread. And I said, what's the name of your store? And he said, Harry Winston.
Ah!
If you ever heard the song Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend, Harry Winston is mentioned in that.
Oh, yeah.
I had no idea who he was. So I was like, oh, well, that's really great. Well, someday maybe you could talk to the Levitts and everybody will all get together.
Oh, wow.
I'm sure Aaron would have been happy with that. It seems that Aaron was a very likable guy. The newspaper article for the store opening said this: Mr. Levitt makes up for his small stature by a readiness of wit and congeniality that has won him a host of friends.
That's not a page 6 mention, Michael.
No, I don't think so. Sadie felt the same way about her uncle. Just so that you don't take it just from me, I'm going to play this little tape. She knew him, so this is what she said.
He was a very energetic, personable man, a keen sense of humor, and must have been an excellent businessman. Jolly, wonderful host. Generally speaking, he was always alive, witty, alert. He gravitated to things fine, concerts, music, that kind of thing. I think he had intellectual tendencies. He liked fine things.
So Aaron had many excellent qualities, but when it came to being a father, he made one big mistake. When your grandfather Melvin was 15, he was written up in the Wilmington newspapers because of his amazing skills as a violinist. In 1928, when he was 18, he was chosen to represent Delaware in the National Orchestra of the United States. After that, he was invited to go to New York to try out to be a student of Leopold Auer, who was Jascha Heifetz's teacher. Melvin wasn't chosen, but really only the best students got a chance to try out. This was a big deal. Then in 1932, when he was 21, he was violin soloist with a student orchestra in the Gold Ballroom at the DuPont Hotel. But Aaron didn't trust this. According to my mother, Aaron said, what's the best you could hope for, playing in the Philadelphia Symphony? And so he made Melvin go to Wharton Business School at the University of Pennsylvania. He convinced Melvin to work in the store, and this was crushing for Melvin. We called him Uncle Milky because he was cheerful with us. But his later life was very, very sad, and Aaron made a very bad call. And Sonny, I don't know, does that sound right to you?
That sounds right. I understand he put that violin away and never played it again.
Can I add to the tragedy, Michael?
Yes.
My mother, Lois, which is Melvin's daughter, and the other musical Levitt. My mother was in the Michigan Opera Company and was a pretty renowned opera singer for a while. My mother had that violin, a Stradivarius, and it was stolen in a break-in of our home.
Oh.
A couple of years after Melvin died.
I'm debating on whether to tell you this, but I'm going to go wild and I'm going to go for it. One of the things I learned from my many unlucky years of trying to play the violin is that it says Stradivarius, which means that it is in the style of Stradivarius, unless it's the Levitt family, where over the years, we maybe think we have a real Stradivarius. There are 650 Stradivarius violins in the world. And in the 1920s, when Melvin would have gotten his, it would have probably cost more than Aaron earned in his entire lifetime. It is unlikely that it was a real Stradivarius. Was it wrong of me to tell you that?
No, actually, I think that makes me feel better. If there was some sort of $250,000 lottery ticket stolen from me, that would be a little harder to deal with than the hard truth later on that perhaps maybe a Levitt exaggerated. It's hard to imagine.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, so I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say that two more events in Aaron's life had a big effect on what happened to our family. Unfortunately, both of these events were terrible. The first was unknown to anyone alive today till I found newspaper clips about it. In 1925, when he was 41, Aaron was driving down Sycamore Street in Wilmington. A 13-year-old girl named Anna Heap ran out into the street and he hit her. Her skull was fractured and she was unconscious for 3 weeks in the hospital. Aaron had called police for help when this happened, but he was charged with assault and battery and he was held on bail. Of course, he was really upset about the accident and visited Anna in the hospital many times. Later, Aaron paid a settlement of $3,500, which was a lot of money at the time. The good news is that eventually Anna recovered. To me, this leads to one interesting, I think, related fact, but this is really me pushing it. But it had been 10 years since Clara and Aaron had a child, and he was very upset, obviously, after this accident. And something like 9 months after all this was resolved, they gave birth to Doris. I think there was some comforting that went on and it resulted in my mother. I can't prove it, but, I feel that there's some kind of connection between those two events. They created a new child. But then, about a dozen years later, Aaron had a second accident, and this one changed everything. It was 1938, and up till then, things were going well for Aaron. In January, he was co-chair of a fundraiser dance at the Hotel DuPont, once again in the Gold Room. Everything happened in the Gold Room of the Hotel DuPont. They were raising money for the synagogue where he and Clara were founders, Temple Beth Shalom. But the next month, on February 14th, 1938, Valentine's Day, at 7 p.m., he stepped off the curb in front of his house on Baynard Boulevard. There was a street light right above him, but it was dark at that hour, and a 19-year-old named Harold Lowery was driving down the street at that moment. Harold had been arrested on New Year's Eve for drunk driving after a collision. They let him off with no charges. This time, Harold Lowery was drunk again. And he hit Aaron. He hit him hard. The newspapers covered the event in great detail. Sally, can you read what they wrote?
The impact of the body and the automobile was heard by a number of residents of the section. Among the group that ran into the street was Mr. Levitt's wife, unaware that it was her husband who was the victim. When she recognized the injured man, she became hysterical.
Whew. To think of Clara, you only knew her a little, Barry and Sonny, but to think of that person hysterical on Valentine's Day in the street. It's terrible. Aaron went to the hospital with a fractured skull and a fractured right hip. He died the next day. And this had a big impact for our family. For Melvin, then there really was no choice. He had to go in the business. I looked in the 1940 U.S. Census, and Melvin and his wife Sylvia and their young son, who was your father Aaron, named after Aaron Levitt, moved back into the house with Clara and Doris. Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, they moved back. This is the power of Clara. It's like, I need you, you're coming. And neither Clara nor Doris was ever the same. Doris told a story. She said she saw the whole thing. She said she was waiting to go to a brownie meeting and get picked up by her friend's brother. She said her friend's brother was drunk and hit her father. So she blamed herself. But it wasn't true. I remember telling the story, Barry, to your grandmother, Evelyn, and she was like, that's a bunch of crap. But Doris, who was, if you knew her at all, she was generally cheerful, like Aaron, but she never could process the sadness, and she never could deal with death. If anything bad happened, she just was like, it's over. That had impact for all of us. So Melvin and Harold took over the store. Harold loved it. He came up with great gimmicks like his father. While we're on that subject, does anyone else have any memories of Levitt Jewelry Store? Like, what did it seem like to you?
It seemed very mom and pop. It seemed very kind of cozy, friendly. I was always happy that was the family business, because it seemed like it hadn't been overrun by corporate anything. It felt like it had been in the family for generations type of place.
Barry, did you get any impression of it?
I just remember there was a fake camera to watch potential criminals if they walked in up high. It wasn't real, but I remember my grandfather, Harold, telling me a story about how there was somebody who came into the store who seemed that he wasn't there to buy jewelry. And my grandfather pointed out the camera and said, "Look, you're on TV." And the potential criminal left the store right away.
Yeah, I remember that too. I was the person. I remember the last time I went to the store. Harold was very excited. He took me on a tour. Melvin was in the back fixing watches. He had one of those magnifying glasses over one eye and tiny tools in his hand. He wasn't saying a word, and he did not seem happy. In many ways, he never really got away from what his parents wanted him to do. Even at the end, he followed in Clara's footsteps. He and Harold and Clara all spent their last days at the same nursing home in Wilmington, called the Kutz Home. There was a big oil painting on the wall of Hattie Kutz, who gave the money for the home. Every time Clara walked by, she loved to remind everyone that she and Hattie were friends. This gave her the right to act like she owned the place. In the end, Clara's mind veered toward dementia. During my visit to the Kutz home in 1979, my mom was wearing silver earrings with concentric circles in them. And Clara pulled in close and tapped the earring with her thick finger till the circles started to spin. And then she just sat and stared and said, "Beautiful, beautiful." That's the little girl whose parents left her in Europe for 4 years on her own.
Wow.
And that's the last thing I remember about her. So that's the story of how a rabbi and his family and a rag dealer and his family came from Lithuania and Latvia in the 1890s to a new country. Then they quickly spread out from Tennessee to Maryland, to Halifax, to Virginia, Michigan, Salt Lake City, and it all led up to the four of you in Texas, California, Maryland, Wisconsin, finally hearing your history and getting the chance to hang out with Sally Libby. And that pretty much brings us to the giveaway. We're at a point where we want to find out if any of you people will take these things. And Sally, I was wondering if you could be the auctioneer and take this over.
Certainly. We have the family history that Sadie wrote out and the cassette tape she recorded in 1977 with information about the Levitt family. Do I have a taker? Don't all jump at once.
Well, I'll tell you, I have those handwritten notes because Aunt Doris sent those to my father.
And Sonny sent it to me. I have it too. That's right.
Good. But what about the cassette? I mean, Josh, I know how interested you are in cassettes.
I think I've played one cassette in my life.
Barry, what about the boys? Don't they want that cassette?
They've been asking me, they want to get into cassettes, but we don't have a cassette player anymore. So I think we'll have to pass.
Oh, God. I'm going to have to throw it out.
Michael, do you have an 8-track by any chance?
All right, Sally, quickly before I cry again, move on to the next thing.
We have Levitt Jewelry Store memorabilia. The advertisements.
I'll take that. I will take that. Are you okay, Matt? Do you want it? Anybody else?
Oh, yeah. No. Go for it.
I'll make copies.
But Barry can overrule you if Barry wants the photo with his Is Uncle Harold
good.
in knickers?
I don't need that.
That I would like.
That
You
better
have to
take
have that. Uncle Woo. It stood for Wonderful Uncle Harold.
Yes, that's what we call it too.
That's right.
Okay, Sally, next.
Okay, we have newspaper articles about Aaron's death and Joseph Castleberg's death.
No one's morbid enough to want it. Oh boy.
Is that a throwout?
Okay, all right.
No, thank you.
I guess so.
Well, now, Michael, is this show not called Throw It Out?
No, it
I'm
is.
just making sure. That
Sally,
we're on the right show.
Sally, tell them how much we thrown out.
0.
Come on,
Okay.
I shredded
1.
that card you gave me.
Okay, one thing.
Michael, could you upload that information in Ancestry? Sometimes you can upload some of those articles so that they're there for posterity and for generations to come.
Then you can throw it out and not even feel like you threw
Right.
it out, Michael.
Right.
Oh my gosh, you are something else. Thank you. And okay, that's a goodie. That's a solution there. Sally, we have one more thing for you to read there.
We
Or a
have
few
the
more.
original photo of Aaron Levitt. Yeah.
Okay, I got a few of those.
Yeah, I mean,
I
okay.
got
No,
two.
Sonny.
I've
two.
already taken.
I have two.
Go ahead.
I have
Awesome.
two.
Yeah, for
Okay.
sure.
Good.
Sally, you skipped the thing ahead of that.
Oh, we have newspaper articles about virtuoso violinist Melvin Levitt.
Send it to either one of us and we'll get it to the other.
Okay.
Oh, it's very exciting. Okay, Sally, do you have anything else?
That's pretty much all of it.
And can I change my mind about getting the tapes too? Because I think I want the tapes now. If you're going to send me the others, I'd like to share them with my brother and my mother, who knew Clara and knew that side of the family. So I'm sorry, I don't want to throw that in there, but I'm thinking I really want those tapes now.
Okay.
So thank you.
Great.
Sonny also can't throw it out.
We're related, Sonny.
Yes.
To bring it to a close, I have one last bit of Sadie. She told us that Aaron's father, Moses Mendel, wrote wonderful sermons. Her father, Max, saved the sermons. This is very relevant to us and what we're doing here, so I'm going to play that for you. Here we go. The last clip at the end of our Levitt story.
He wrote these sermons, and he hoped that someday they would be able to publish them. But unfortunately, the tragedy of his early death precluded any such thing, so my father kept them. And I remember vividly that I would see them wherever we moved, from Virginia to Annapolis to Baltimore, wherever we moved, this bundle of manuscript wrapped in linen would follow us. When my father died, my mother said that just last month my father had said to her, "You know, when I die, I want my father's manuscripts to be buried with me, because one day a maid is going to come up in the attic and do some cleaning, and she won't know what these are, and she will throw them away. At least I will feel that they're with me." And when my father died, they built a little box of some sort, and they buried them. They buried them with him. Although Robert pulled out one of the things and kept it.
Okay, the key thing is the last thing she said. Robert, her brother, pulled out one of the sermons and kept it. It is still on this planet.
Wow.
It didn't get buried. It may be out there. If one of our distant relatives hears this podcast, and if we hear from that person at any point, whether I'm on this planet or not, one of you has to take that sermon and pass it along, because, Sally, what's the name of this podcast?
I couldn't throw it out.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
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 Bye, guys.
I couldn't throw it out. I had to scream and shout.
If you've been saving some family history of your own, especially if it's a crazy story that nobody knows, send us a photo and tell us a bit of your tale on our website, throwitoutpodcast.com. We'll highlight the best entries on our site. Well, remember, you can get updates about I Couldn't Throw It Out by following us on Instagram at throwitoutpod. Or you can go to our website and look in the right column where you can sign up for our newsletter. Then you'll always know when new episodes come out.
And now, please join us as we dance around the living room to our rockin' theme song by Boots Camp and Don Ralph, leader of our favorite band, Life in a Blender. And don't forget to join us for the next historic episode of
I Couldn't Throw It Out.
Nancy's her big garage. This isn't a this isn't a mirage. Decades of stories memory stacked. There is a redolence of some irrelevant facts. Oh, I couldn't throw it out. I had to scream and shout. It all seems so unjust, but still I know I must. Before I turn to dust, I've got to throw it out. Before I turn to dust, I've got to throw it out. But I couldn't throw it out. I couldn't throw it out. I'll sort through my possessions in these paper sessions. I guess this is what it's about. The poems, cards, and papers, the moldy, musty vapors, I've just gotta sort it out.